turn over to Jenna, who will introduce the rest of the panel. And again, we're very excited to have you all here today.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you. And can everyone hear? Yeah, in the back, you're good? Okay, thanks, guys. Liz, thank you so much, and thank you to the Partnership for LIC and for all the event organizers for this great morning and day, and to really celebrate innovation in LIC. And I think, really we'll obviously touch on life sciences and, what we think the challenges and opportunities, and really what we'd like to see over the next several years, take root here in Long Island City. But more than anything, we're really talking about innovation and what excites us, and I think why we're all even, here today, but really kind of working every day to really try to make Long Island City something special, not just for, tomorrow, but really for the next, several decades to come. So thanks, everyone. And it's my pleasure to start to welcome everyone here on the panel. And we'll actually just go down, I guess, the row, maybe starting with Tom. Just introduce a little bit, yourself, your interest in Long Island City, and then we'll kind of get into it.
Yeah, I'm Tom Brennan. I'm with Arch Venture Partners. I've known them for 30 years. I've been with them for 10. I just flew in from Albuquerque this morning. That's where I live. I spend about 10 days a month in New York City developing their life science effort here. We're super serious about it. We're putting about 2 or 3 FTE total into New York City right now. Pre-warn everyone, it takes us a long time to get comfortable with a new geography, but we are doing it. It took us 5 years to get hold of Dublin. It took us a couple of decades to build San Francisco, our effort there, and Boston. And I think that we're really in the early stages of doing it here. We now have Hybercell, Fillmore, Lodo, Petra, Life Mine, a couple of others. So I think that the rate's increasing. And I like Long Island City just because it's kind of, we're looking to have the condensed atmosphere of a Kendall Square. We think that that's really important actually to build out the ecosystem. So we're really excited about learning more and being part of it and hopefully getting kind of a kick-ass company going here soon. So that's all.
Thanks, Tom. Sarah?
Hi, Sarah Eshelman. I'm a principal with Spiro Ventures. We're an early stage investment fund, primarily looking at Series A stage companies, probably the earliest stage represented here. We are a new fund launched early last year. Life science is actually kind of a new category for us. We were more of a generalist tech investor with some history in marketplaces, a little bit of deep tech, primarily West Coast focused. I'm sort of building up the New York operation. About a third of our portfolio now is New York based, and really excited about the potential, I think, in Long Island City, and sort of see life sciences as experiencing a bit of a broadening, especially at the early stage, with a lot more in the software and data side, in addition to more traditional diagnostics and therapeutics. So excited to see what will become.
Rob?
Morning, everybody. Rob Alberon with King Street Properties. We are a Boston-based life science owner, operator, and developer. We're the largest privately held life science developer in Boston. We have about 2 million feet in the greater Boston area that we own and operate, and we have about 1 million feet under development. We've actually recently purchased a building here in Long Island City, Court Square. It's about a 267,000-foot building. It's currently under construction. It's our first investment outside of the greater Boston area, which I think speaks to our belief in the market. So we're very excited to be part of the New York ecosystem. I think you guys touched on some of the key aspects, but we really see Long Island City as being a driver and a key component of life science going forward. It's very, very early on, especially on the investment side, but on the real estate side too. There's very little life science real estate. But you can see the kind of the wave coming, and we feel like Long Island City is poised to be right in the middle of it. So we're excited to be part of this.
Thanks, Rob. Dan?
So Dan Cohen, the co-founder and CEO of 3D Bio, and we are taking bioprinting technology, which some of you may have heard about, and translating into the clinic to meet the FDA's requirements. So we are growing living tissue, starting with cartilage, for therapeutic applications. Our main one actually is children born without ears. Today it's a very challenging surgical procedure. We just last week got orphan drug designation for the FDA, which is a milestone, and we're moving along. So we make our own bioprinters, we make our own bioink, we have our own cell processes, and we do our manufacturing in Long Island City. And my interest in Long Island City came from, we started in Cornell in Ithaca. A third of the company lived down here, was commuting up every week. and eventually to get the hires with industrial experience, we had to move down here, and found it as a great fit. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So maybe to kick off, maybe we could talk a little bit about demand. So obviously really excited that we have, I guess I should say, and as Liz pointed out, I kind of wear the real estate hat on behalf of Alexandria, and have now about 300,000 square feet that we are redeveloping here in Long Island City on the kind of the intersection of 48th Avenue and 30th Streets. But in addition, I manage our New York-based Alexandria Venture Investments portfolio. So I'll kind of toggle between both hats. But as an investor, a developer, and co-investor, I have two investors on the panel, an innovator, and Rob is certainly an innovator too, but also on the real estate side. So where do you see demand? How are we going to attract other investors, innovators, companies, et cetera, to Long Island City? Maybe we could start by talking about the attributes, and then we'll kind of get into we'll mix up the challenges in the middle of the panel, and then maybe try to end on positive too. So demand, key attributes, things that will attract people like yourselves to this place. Anyone want to take the lead?
Well, I'll start on the real estate side. I'm the least interesting by far on this panel because I'm curious to hear from you guys. But one of the things that we tried to do was kind of look out ahead and build a building on a speculative basis, which is something that a lot of folks don't typically do, especially in an industry that's as unproven as life science in New York. So we've gone out and we're building our building with no tenants in it currently. We're working hard on that right now. But we thought that to help catalyze the industry, and part of the things that we heard was that there was no space for these tenants to go, that these new companies that are being incubated in the institutions and in the new incubators, that there's very few options for them. So we've tried on the real estate side to go out and build on a spec basis, which is something that frankly New York has lacked in life science, and there's some of it now. Obviously, with what you guys are doing with Alexandria and others in Manhattan, but that's how we have tried to help grow. So then these companies have somewhere to go after they come out of the institutions.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, there's just so much talent in New York. There really is, and there's a lot of talent in New Jersey, coming from the whole biopharma corridor. And I think what's interesting for us is, if we're out in deep Jersey, we're going to be able to recruit the biopharma corridor type employees, but we're not really going to be able to recruit some of the younger people coming out of PhD programs, or and for our business, we need, let's say, manufacturing specialists and quality specialists, and Jersey's a place to go for that. But we also need robotics engineers and coders, and we need scientists coming straight out of PhD programs in the city, and we needed both. And we found that here we can bring people in from Jersey. So we hired a number of people who came from places like Sanofi, and they're commuting in. We also found, surprisingly, a lot of people working at Sanofi also live in the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side, and this is a much better commute for them. We had one person just 2 weeks ago leave Celgene because, in part, he's excited about what we're doing, but didn't want to go down to, a new facility, deep south, Jersey. So it's been an interesting mix for us, in part because we need both. We need sort of that more, I don't know what to call it, let's say tech focus talent mixed with biopharma. It's just, I guess every time I say that we're in Long Island City, people are surprised. But, it's affordable space. It's good space, safe neighborhoods. I've yet to find one person we've been recruiting who actually cited that as a factor in their decision. In fact, we're not too far from the train lines. So I think transportation, affordability, and this mix of being between different labor markets, sort of at the intersection of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say on the demand side of things, as we're starting to think about lease up for our building and deliverment next year, almost every single company that we've spoken to that is showing real interest is certainly lab users, but at the intersection in some way. So hardware, software, engineering, et cetera. Very few, pure, and I mean, that also speaks to life sciences today. I mean, very few pure play biotechs anymore. Everything is, kind of a little AI, a little machine learning, a little engineering, et cetera. And really, I think biology, we're only going to move biology forward by, gaining insights from, other disciplines. And we're certainly seeing that being reflected in the types of companies that are interested, not just in New York broadly, but specifically in Long Island City. So I don't know. I mean, Sarah, this is kind of where you play most, is kind of at this intersection. So maybe speak a little bit about what you've been seeing.
Yeah, I mean, my vantage point is really looking at the early stage group. And I think, folks have rightly pointed out, there's a lot of interesting, very, very early kind of, incubation from, idea to, okay, now I have, a very early MVP. What I would love to see, and then I think, we're seeing more and more of this, cadre of pure biotechs that are moving into more of the tech investment world, and then more generalist tech investors like myself who are moving a little bit closer into the life sciences domain. What I would love to see, though, on the demand side, which I think will catalyze the demand side, is more support to kind of help companies make that jump from, okay, an amazing idea that spun out of a research institution, now I need to build up a team with a little bit more commercial acumen and actually form a company and start to test the product in market. I think I hear a lot about the real estate side of things, which is critically important for these folks. It's sort of just the basic foundational infrastructure, but I think there's more that I'd like to see as far as early stage capital, and that's both non-dilutive capital is sort of the best kind for everyone around the table. Beyond that, I think there's sort of a knitting together of the sources of capital that already exist in the city, and sort of making sure that there's connections amongst sort of the different pockets of investors, and then on the sort of linking to talent side, companies that I see who are really early coming again out of academia, I think oftentimes struggle to find sort of that commercial counterpart, or tech counterpart, as you're describing. And so, a little bit more of that knitting together, I think, would be really important to really drive the demand side and sort of lift it up.
Yeah, I would agree. So kind of segueing a little bit, so Tom, so now we can say Long Island City has recruited one of the great minds of Albuquerque to come and, recruit and invest here. So that's exciting. But, and we've talked a lot about this in the past, but how important is it for early stage investors, and we'll talk about kind of incentives for, early stage companies and investors in a moment, but how important is it for early stage investors to be in the same physical geography or in close, geographical proximity to your portfolio companies, and to really building them, nurturing them, growing them? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, Arch is geography agnostic. I think we're super early. We're one of the few that are. Most venture funds have all their portfolio companies within, 20 square miles of their office. So we're not. We'll travel. We're everywhere. And so relative to demand, I've kind of been around the science field, Bell Labs, Los Alamos, Xerox PARC, a lot of places. And I got to tell you, I think the quality and the depth of the science in New York City is second to none. I think that's the reason that we're here. So I think we definitely see the talent, we see the platform, the disruptive, groundbreaking technology in New York City, and I think it's got huge potential. I think that we've been here 5 years. I would say we've interacted, and we're floored. We can't even keep up with it. We've seen less than 5%.
Wow.
Of the technology. It's just a staggering. So that's that. What else do we want to see? I think that we'd like to see kind of more of an ecosystem, a reduction in cross section. We don't want to just see the J Labs and ARE and whatever. It's something that's bigger and so forth. And I think that's the appeal of Long Island City, to actually generate that campus-like environment. And the reason is because the key feature for us is to get one of our 40 senior management teams that went public or were acquired and produced huge returns for Arch, who we're always going to go and double down on. And they're going to make the decision on some of this key science. We need those teams, because we're going to turn the company over to them, to make a decision that they want to come and live in New York City. And I think that's the key. And I don't have any real answer as to why they're not doing that. They want to go to San Diego, they want to go to San Francisco, or they want to go Boston, and I think the reason is that if they'll lop off, the opportunity, then they have many other choices to go. So I think it's the management, but I don't think it's the technical talent of the company. I think that's perfectly adequate here.
Okay, so maybe that's it's super helpful. So maybe think about it, Rob, maybe you can speak this a little bit in terms of, your wanderings and the people that you've been speaking to. But as far as incentivizing companies, talent, et cetera, to come here, what is going on now currently in Long Island City that, is really helping with that, both on the, talent workforce side, but also on kind of the key management and attracting the decision makers to Long Island City?
Yeah, so that's obviously a key component, which you guys are closer to than we are. But there's the financial incentives that tenants have to be in New York and then Long Island City. There's some real estate incentives that the state and the city have announced, which are obviously helping catalyze and grow the industry. It's one of the things we talk about a lot from a real estate perspective. What can we do to make things more attractive? We love Long Island City for a lot of those reasons, because you've got transportation, so people can, as Dan was just saying, people are coming from various geographical areas. One of the things, and this resonated very early on, is access to airports. That, from an international perspective, it's very easy to get to New York as opposed to some other cities. But the ecosystem's still got a ways to go. A lot of it, we think, has to do with support staff, too, that the senior management might be here, but it might have an interest in being here, but they need to make sure that there's all the lab technicians and everyone kind of throughout the whole chain, which we need here desperately. And yes, there's a big historical pharmaceutical industry in New Jersey, and that's going to help, but a lot of it has to grow within New York. So it's LaGuardia colleges and other institutions around here that we think are going to play a key role in educating folks to be part of these companies, because it's not, obviously the senior management is the key component, and that's what's driving everything, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So we're hearing a lot from Boston. People are reaching out to us, folks that know we're doing a project down here and are very, very curious. So we hate to admit it in Boston that people are intrigued by New York, but they are. So, there's always going to be a cohort of people. It's just such a big city, and there's so much diversity across industries and everything that it's going to be very attractive. So it's a matter, I think, of putting together a lot of pieces. And it's been very interesting from our perspective. Just we're real estate developers, but we've been much more involved in kind of trying to put the pieces together and putting various constituents together, much more than we ever do in Boston, where all this exists. So it's kind of a team effort, I think, from all the people that are involved to get the industry going. And events like this, frankly, are very, very important, I think, overall for the industry as well. It's amazing. And I'll stop talking in a second, but when I first started coming down here, probably 3 years ago, I went to an event at the EDC, and it was in a conference room. There were, I'm going to say, 15 people there. And that was kind of that was it. And it's just grown tremendously over time, and it feels like it's picking up momentum every day.
Absolutely. So maybe, Sarah, back to a comment that you made earlier, because I think it's important. It's important for the audience, too. But, talking about, incentives and what can, city partnerships, et cetera, do to really support the companies and the talent that we want to take shape here. So any ideas that you want to share, any ideas that you've had, and Tom, too, Dan, feel free, anything that you've seen in other places that has worked.
I mean, two things that come to mind. When I, 3-4 years ago now, reading about all this life sciences momentum in New York State, New York City, have been surprised to see the vast majority of it be real estate focused, which is obviously important and foundational. But I think in addition to that, some kind of efforts around startup capital for these companies coming out of local universities, coming out of the academic medical institutions, et cetera, I think is another critical precondition. So that would be one. There are several city and state-based programs in operations, but I would just love to see more of that. And secondly, I think, like I was sort of alluding to this, knitting together of all of the different pockets of activity around the city. I started navigating this about 1.5 years ago when we launched Spiro and really made the decision to try to get into sort of the life sciences and broader healthcare world, and found, there are lots of really exciting pockets, but they're kind of hard to find for a newcomer, for someone who's not like sort of knitted into the fabric of New York City already. Whether that's NYU, whether that's Columbia, whether that's JLabs or Alexandria, or kind of you name it. I'll call out Yasmin, who's in the audience, who obviously wrote this incredible report that we've all read, but she also has a newsletter, which I've recently been added to, and it's just a list of all the activities that are going on in and around New York City related to life sciences, and it's hugely valuable. I mean, the number of people that I talk to who get this newsletter and sort of that's how they get plugged in is growing, and I think efforts like that, just to connect people and companies to capital providers to potential customers to partners, et cetera, I think is something that will be critical to kind of take us to the next level. So capital, is always required, but I think especially in New York at this sort of critical moment is important. And then that kind of knitting together of the network and really like bringing these pockets of activity and turning that into this cluster that I think we're all envisioning is what I'd love to see.
Awesome. Yeah.
The only thing I'd add is I think that I've heard, so we started the company about 2013, and again, a lot of people are confused, why are we doing New York? And talent was one of the things that always people say, well, if you have to build teams certainly rapidly, how could you do that here? I actually think it's a brand thing. It's a brand issue. If I say Austin, everyone just imagine an industry. If I say Boston, someone imagines a set of industries. And if I say, well, we have investors out of Boston, we just brought in a consultant from Boston, there's actually brand associated with all these things, and we just attach a lot of value, make a lot of assumptions about cities. And New York just doesn't have that brand yet. But when it comes to lab techs, when it comes to straight up scientists, or when it comes to seasoned, industrial engineers, manufacturing specialists, that's all here. And actually, I feel that one of the things I'm happy about is it makes us different, because from the start, and again, this wasn't a fact-based decision. We just made a gut decision in the beginning that we're going to do it here, period. And afterwards, I started to realize the benefits. One of the benefits is there aren't a billion biotechs here. And when you have something interesting and you tell that story that we're going to do it here, you actually find all that New York talent that probably is here for idiosyncratic reasons to begin with. So yes, maybe some people go to an ecosystem because it has the elements of an ecosystem. I'm sure management teams maybe are making lifestyle decisions or other kinds of, it's hard to say. It's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. It's interesting to think what those management teams might actually be assessing. But most of the people I find that are here doing science in the city are doing it here for idiosyncratic reasons, sometimes personal reasons. They built their career. They're anchored here. So there's a lot of talent. And I think companies that actually just commit to it, even though it's not entirely fact-based at this point, will find, and we have found that there's a tremendous amount of talent, and there aren't missing elements of the ecosystem that I've found. There aren't missing support structures that I found. I mean, you've got every vendor in the world here with armies of sales reps, so I can get the equipment I need. You can get the people you need. You have the transportation you need. So I think it's a brand thing, which will change over time. I don't know how long that will take, 1, 3, 5, 10 years, but I don't really think there's a structural deficit.
Yeah, and I would agree, and I do think that it's more about founders like yourselves telling their stories, and so we're going to get to that in a moment, but really about how you've been successful here, because I think like anything else in any other innovative hub or district in the country and really in the world, it's about what has actually been created there, and what is the science or the the ideas that really brought people around it. I mean, you talked about Bell Labs. That was once upon a time, but maybe take just a couple minutes so that in 10 years from now people can say that they were at a panel in a very small room with 3D Bio, one of the first biotechs ever to grow up and develop really important drugs for patients or products, drug-like products for patients out of Long Island City. So I just want Dan, tell us a little bit more about 3D Bio and then how you specifically found your space, whether in Long Island City. I know you were kind of looking at Long Island City in general for a while, but it's I think a pretty interesting story worth sharing.
Sure. So in 2002, first week of freshman year as an undergrad, I started working with a professor at Cornell, who then joined another professor who moved to Cornell, and I was a student who combined a printing technology with a hydrogel technology, basically a material that grows living tissues. And that was at the very, very early days of what we now call bioprinting. At the time, it was solid freeform fabrication of heterogeneous arbitrary geometries. I wish I thought of bioprinting. It would have made my life a lot easier then. So time passed, did the PhD straight through, went to McKinsey for 4 years, and then founded the company in 2013, I guess, beginning of 2014. And a third of the team, even from the start, lived down here and would commute up to Ithaca every single week. What we liked about Ithaca were some of the things we like about Long Island City. Affordable space. That was a very, very, very big part of it. And because we were one of the few biotechs trying to do it in Ithaca, we go to Cornell Engineering and recruit. And for idiosyncratic reasons, some people just wanted to stay another 3 years. Maybe they had partners there. And we found unbelievable talent that just was entirely focused on making it their mission to work for us, which was great because, it's a combination of the story, but also, again, I would not underestimate idiosyncratic reasons for why people choose geographies. So we found amazing talent and affordable space, and it was so valuable to us that a third of the team, including our chief science officer who came out of industry, drove up every single week for years. And then we finally got to a point where we really needed to scale up manufacturing. We needed people who necessarily had come from industry for 15, 20-year careers, and we weren't going to find that in Ithaca. So we wanted to move down here. And now, I guess, for how we found Long Island City, so Alexandria was sort of a bridge for us. So we had a foot in the city, in a small space in the Alexandria Center. So it wasn't, I guess that was sort of the bridge for us. We already had the ability to hire one person down here, on the bio side, let's say, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. And then eventually we just said to the team, we're moving, who's with us? And every single person came, except one, who, again, for idiosyncratic reasons, said, I just can't go back to New York. I grew up there for personal reasons. I just can't go back. So that's just been the story, throughout our entire history, just, why people choose certain locations. But other than that one person, every single person moved down here, pulled their kids out of school, sold their homes. And it's interesting, as I had, asked some of our key people, all right, we have 2 options. We need about 12,000 square feet, let's say. At the time, we thought maybe a little bit less, but none, either case, we knew we needed more space than we ever had before. Manhattan would be cost prohibitive, for sure. So, and then also just infrastructure-wise, I think we were starting to realize that we needed infrastructure needs that would be maybe a little bit more difficult in a multi-tenant situation, but that was not really our primary factor. So I said we can either go to Jersey or we go to Long Island City, but I couldn't possibly think of one other option. And about a third to a half of the team sort of indicated that they weren't too excited about the commute for Jersey, but all of them were, excited about Long Island City. And part of that is some of them were living in Greenpoint, some of them were living in Long Island City, and some of them were on the Upper East Side, Upper West Side, and some are coming from Jersey. So I think the moment I found out that, I realized our team was excited about that option geographically, we started looking more closely. And then there were a couple options, and then we just happened to, by chance, stumble upon a building that's all our own, which for our infrastructure needs has a lot of benefits. So that, plus it was affordable. That's how we made the decision. And again, not fact-based. It was just sort of a gut decision, and now we realize that it was a really important decision for us because it allows us to build a clean room. We have the infrastructure to do that. It allows us, again, on the recruiting side, which I've spoken about extensively, and we're really happy with that.
Thank you. So maybe Rob, Sarah, Tom, what other attributes in your wanderings have people talked about that are most exciting to them about Long Island City or New York? Because I also think it's important that as much as we're creating something here in Long Island City, it cannot be divorced from New York. The life science cluster in New York and the ecosystem, I think it relies on the institutions that are largely in Manhattan. I think it relies on talent coming from Manhattan or even from the other river in New Jersey. And it's too small of a cluster, and it's something that, is really precious, but growing, it needs to be nurtured. It can't just be Long Island City versus, it has to be and. I personally feel pretty strongly about that, and I think that we, probably share that thesis. So as far as attributes, though, for Long Island City, what it can attract, in people that you've spoken to, what gets them most excited, what companies have you seen that are most likely to start up here and really be able to succeed here from an early on? Now, Dan told me he has 30 people here, which is incredible because they started as 2 just a couple of years ago. So anyway, what about you guys? What are you seeing out there?
I'll make an astute statement of the obvious. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of things here. Try to make them quick. I think Long Island City is really exciting. Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
It's like a frontier. And I totally agree with wanting to come here versus commuting to New Jersey. No offense. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's really exciting here. That's one. We would love to see $80 a square foot with build-out included versus $160 a square foot. In Albuquerque, it's 15. So I think we really love to see that. I think that we always would start out around 15,000 square feet and want immediate access to 30,000 square feet. But, I think the stuff that we're doing is heavily funded. So we'd go from 10 employees to 400 employees pretty quickly and maybe more. So we would need the building, to scale into.
We're ready. We're ready.
Yeah.
You're looking at me. This is great.
I think that's important. We have one company that's anally focused on this gross receipts issue, and they're looking for spots specifically because it really benefits their employees and the company. So an expansion of that, I think, would really be nice. And then, the obvious, I think it'd be really nice to work on really nice $4,000 a month apartments for people. I think it would be really nice to have really good affordable schooling and then to condense an environment to make it homogeneous and fun and attractive place to live. And I think that's kind of the sum of what we're looking for. And I think that Long Island City is one of the few places that I have seen that actually has that capability.
Yep. Totally agree. Sarah?
I like your framing of this as really like a New York story, and then within New York, Long Island just makes sense. Long Island City, rather. I think having a bit of a vested interest in being sort of the lone member of Spiro's New York office here, I think there's a huge amount of potential as far as really turning this into this life sciences cluster that we're talking about. And when you think about the trajectory of these companies that do have greater physical space requirements than a pure tech play. I mean, I talk to software companies all the time that are working out of their apartment. They have a remote team that's distributed across the U.S. Sometimes they have people in Europe or Asia. I don't think those possibilities really exist to the same extent in the life sciences sector. So there is this requirement for physical space, and you do have to go to that space most days, or at least a significant share of the week. And I also think another feature of this industry is that it's largely, at least the stuff I look at, is largely B2B, and being close to your customers is also really important. I talk to CEOs all the time who are on airplanes, 3 times a week, getting in front of their customers because, we sort of hear time and again that, one in-person meeting is equivalent to 5 or 10 Zoom meetings as far as the pace of progressing a deal. And, so being proximate to customers who are in the tri-state area is really important here. I think you get that to some extent, on the West Coast and obviously in Boston. I think being proximate to the airports, which we talked about, is really important. And when I think about the space in Manhattan, it's just limited. It's really expensive, and as an early stage company, your sort of number one goal is to not run out of money before you've demonstrated the milestones that you need in order to raise the next round, in order to get to the next stage. And so anything a company can do that will extend their runway, reduce costs. A saying that we have within Spiro, one of our founding partners spent some time in the film industry, and I guess in that industry, you say you want to put all your money on the screen. It's the actors, it's the sets, it's the script, it's the editing. It's not the craft service table. It's not the dressing rooms and all of that. And as a new fund, we talk about that a lot. The space that we occupy is relatively modest. And to the extent that we can limit our costs there and put money into our companies and into stuff that's going to fuel their success is really where we want to spend our resources and how we would encourage them to spend resources. So it sort of just makes sense. Any company in my portfolio that's considering a move, I would absolutely encourage them to consider this space. And Tom mentioned the lifestyle considerations. I think a lot of the founders that I see in the life sciences space, they do tend to be, they're not not like 22-year-olds. You know, they're not like just, well, maybe some of them are, but they're not, you know, just out of college or graduate school. They're, you know, some of them have families and they have, you know, a different set of considerations when they're choosing a space. And so I think, you know, it's a bikeable area. There's obviously, you know, I love the ferry. It's accessible, and I think that's really important. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe we'll take a pause, open it up to questions, and then come back to the panel. Does anyone have one? Okay, there. Do we have a mic? Okay, let's see. Yeah, one in the back right there. Go ahead.
You just mentioned families. You know, people that are scientists or
Do you
whoever.
want to
working-
stand up and just introduce yourself? Thank you.
Sure. I'm Alan Sooner from Silvercup
Hi.
Properties.
How are you?
You mentioned families, and I think one of the things that hasn't been discussed that I don't know the answer to is when you're attracting talent, which is what you're focused on, and these folks, they want to move to Long Island City, what are they doing for their kids for education? What in your experiences, collective experiences, what are they doing for housing? I would really like to know an answer to that.
So I guess one thing I will say, and then, I mean, you guys can comment. So I think as far as the companies that we've spoken to, it's not necessarily contemplated that everyone will move to Long Island City proper, but what they do like is that their talent can basically stay in place from New Jersey because they can get here from, you know, access to the 7 train and public transportation. They can come from the outer boroughs. They can come from Westchester. So I haven't spoken to anyone yet. Now, again, we're only in the beginning of the lease up, so we'll kind of see how it changes over time. But we haven't really been speaking to anyone that is actually contemplating a full-on move to Long Island City proper. Maybe that will change. If we create, you know, great housing opportunities and daycare and, you know, school options, and I think as people tend to be here, like anything else, we'll see people move. We've had, you know, at the Alexandria Center, more people have moved within, you know, 5 blocks of the campus just because that's what they like doing, because no one really is looking to move, you know, between 27th Street and 32nd Street if they don't have to be right there. So I think over time we'll see that coming as, you know, some of these properties do lease up and as more companies take root there. But that's just my personal experience. Anyone else?
I mean, I have a 1-year-old, and I'm going through the rude awakening of understanding how expensive it is to have a child in the city, to be honest. It is very, very expensive. And, you know, most of the people I know who, well, at least the direct examples I'm aware of, who work in Long Island City live in Jersey. And they put their kids in school in Jersey. Because I grew up in Jersey, I at least understand how the school systems there worked. You lived in a certain district, you got a certain school, you bought into a community because you knew exactly which school you were going to, which is why almost everyone in the community I grew up in moved there for that school period. And for my limited research in Long Island City in particular, we were constantly at a decision. There's a lot of uncertainty as to, okay, so we move there, we invest there, investing our, you know, our family's time there, and we have almost no certainty, or at least it appeared to us, as to exactly which school, you know, our daughter would go into. So I think it's not that there aren't great schools in Long Island City, because there are. I think there's just enough uncertainty to make it a difficult decision to make that move. So, well, then you say, well, what's the alternative? Jersey, or let's say really, really, really expensive parts of the city, which, as you start having school fees, become increasingly painful. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer, actually. I know it's a really important topic. It's one of the, when I see people leaving the city, friends of mine, that's the reason. And they're saying, well, if I'm leaving Manhattan, if I'm leaving, you know, the metro area, I might as well go to California. I might as well go, you know, back to my family in Texas. So there's an exodus right now of people in my personal network, my personal life, but that's just me. And I think, you know, for every one of those, there are probably other people at different stages of life or with other factors that are moving in. So I'm not saying that it's broadly an exodus, but it is a real factor. And I'm seeing a lot of people in my life now impacted by those kinds of things.
And I will say that a lot of the talent that companies at the intersection happen to be drawing are slightly, you know, 10 slightly younger than more mature biopharma companies, et cetera, just at a different stage of kind of the trajectory. So just as far as Long Island City goes and those that are kind of innovating and really making an impact here in social services and other infrastructure in Long Island City, I do think that families, education, housing, things that cater to young families is absolutely critical, as, you know, as Tom and Dan mentioned. Other questions? Yes, go ahead. Just stand up and introduce yourself, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chloe Buscarin from NBBJ out of Boston. Question is for Rob and perhaps Jenna too. Can you talk Can you talk to your company's decisions to do speculative lab office in Long Island City? And then perhaps compare, contrast New York's life science cluster to Boston?
Sure. So
Do you have 20 hours? No.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I know. Great question. Great question.
So one of the things that we talk about a lot to our investors is that it's lab is a speculative business, even in Boston, even when the vacancy is almost 0%. Generally speaking, the life science tenants they're not looking out quite as far as traditional office. And this is generalizing, obviously. It's much more stepped, so someone has a scientific breakthrough or a major round of funding, and all of a sudden they need 30,000 feet tomorrow. So what that leads to is more spec development in general. So we've done a lot of it in Boston, and pretty much everything we've done and are doing is on a spec basis. Now it ends up largely being leased by the time you finish it, and I think Alexandria would say a similar experience. Here, it's more true speculative. We obviously we're out marketing. We're just starting our process right now, but it's going to take a little while because it's you don't have big pharma necessarily driving demand quite like we do in Boston, and that impacts obviously all the way down. We think that we're building our building to be very, very flexible for that kind of early mid-stage company. Now, obviously, if someone else comes along, we're not going to say no. But that leads to, you're going to have smaller tenants. It's going to take a little while to do, and you have to be willing to invest the capital and the time to go on a spec basis. So it's not as dissimilar to Boston as people think from our perspective, but obviously the demand's a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add to that is it's speculative in the sense that we didn't announce the property, in tandem with a lease, but after operating here for 10 years and really kind of creating a demand pipeline for our building, we had a pretty good sense of which companies, will go in there and what percent so that we could design, to that. So it wasn't totally spec. And, the difference with Boston, I honestly don't even think you can compare the two at all. And like I, alluded to earlier on, I think the companies that will move into Long Island City are pioneering, a la 3D Bio, but really at the intersection of biotech plus. Thank you. Go ahead.
Chris Varjan, Lean Associates. To kind of dovetail off that, we're talking about spec in the life science space. So how far down the road are you going with your build out before a tenant, and what particular maybe key points of infrastructure are you doing that may differ from some of the more creative, tailored office spaces and things of the sort in the market?
People love real estate. It's amazing. Maybe I can.
It's the least interesting of all the stuff we're talking about, too.
I know. You want to go for it, and then I'll chime in.
A lot of it has to do with the base building infrastructure. We're putting in base building infrastructure that can support, 100%. 100% of the building being lab. Now, it's not going to be 100% lab. It's going to be a mix of office and lab. But a lot of it's setting up the infrastructure and making it, frankly, easier for the tenants to hook into the systems. I think, one of the advantages, frankly, of going to a building that's owned by a life science developer is that we've done this many times and worked with tenants. So a tenant that's early stage that, the real estate is a kind of a necessary evil. It's not what they want to do. We'll hold their hand, and we're doing build-outs for tenants and kind of helping them through the whole process. So a lot of it is what the building is, but there's a softer side to it that I think is equally important, especially here, frankly, in kind of helping the tenants navigate the process. I don't know, Jen, if you have a different...
1,000%. 1,000%. This is definitely part of the business and, part of the secret sauce or the niche, so to speak, is just how to do this and do it in a smart, cost-effective, but also timely way so you can accommodate tenants.
And I've seen both of these, right? Because
Yep.
I've seen what it's like to move into an amazingly well-built life sciences center like Alexandria, where all the gas lines, all the electrical lines, all the infrastructure is turnkey and perfectly thought out. And I've also had the experience more recently of taking on a raw space that was not designed for life sciences, and honestly being shocked how hard it is to take a raw space and make it usable for life sciences. the mundane become massive challenges. It takes, so to your all credit, it takes real expertise, and I think a lot of that comes from working with the right engineering firms that have done it many, many times. But the HVAC, lots of special requirements. You have New York City codes. You have also, which is its own animal. Truthfully, you have. Again, even just the electrical code in New York City is importantly different. I'm sure anyone in real estate appreciates that, but specifically when it comes to lab spaces, there are all sorts of other quirky codes that start to pop up. So electrical, mechanical, floor loadings, which is something. Luckily, we had the right kinds of floor loadings. We wouldn't have asked the right questions, but we just got lucky in a lot of ways. So there are a lot of requirements specific to laboratories, and I think, you guys make it look easy, to be honest. So.
No, but thank you for your question, because it's often misunderstood. So thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead. Introduce yourself, please. Sorry.
My name is Sarah Cohen. I'm a property owner out here. Don't know much about life sciences. My question is, you said that real estate was the least interesting part of what we're doing here, and to you, what's the most interesting part?
The tenants and what's going on the science side. I mean, we're building the buildings for for all these innovations, and it's amazing to see in Boston what goes on in these buildings, and not to sound corny, but what's being cured, and we're tangentially involved in it. So it's exciting to see all that, and I think Long Island City can play a big role in that going forward. So I have to say it in jest, but obviously the demand is the most interesting part from our perspective, and we can build the buildings, but it's the tenants, obviously, that make these buildings and this ecosystem successful.
Well, it sounds like there's a network that exists in Boston, and we're building that network here. And so once we build that network, you guys will have built the building.
Well, we also, I think, part of what we do, so, and I think it should be reflective of the panel, as, on the real estate side, I mean, we have our in-house venture arm too, but we work really hard, everyone on this panel works really hard to be together to create the ecosystem, not just in the building, but around the buildings and in the community, so that we can attract the talent, so we can build the companies, so that we can invest in the companies. And you don't have one without the other. So the real estate is certainly part of it. It's a home and a place, but without the surrounding, and I don't mean to sound corny, but without the surrounding of Long Island City and the community and the transportation and the other efforts, and look how involved Liz and her team is in building and really nurturing the community here. So you really need it all. And when you look at places, you asked about the difference between here in Boston, you have that. And each attribute and each contributor and each stakeholder is really, truly that important. I mean, we're talking about schools on the life science panel, but it's all part of it.
Sure, and I think that one of the things we don't talk about when we're talking about Long Island City is this is one of the few places that really has the space that
Absolutely.
has the ability for you to grow
1,000%.
and has everything else
1,000%.
where you can get the schools.
Yeah,
It's gonna
absolutely.
be harder to do that in the middle of Manhattan.
Absolutely. No, and a partnership and a municipality that is, incredibly, devoted and dedicated and passionate about seeing this happen, and you need that. I think the Manhattan proper, the city, has done a wonderful job in touting life sciences, and I think in the past few years, in addition to, not to sound gratuitous, but our own efforts and the efforts of every single person on this panel, in New York, but really bringing it to the fore. But if you don't have that dedication and that passion, you can't do it, because cities and municipalities can also get in the way. So, anyone else? Okay, how much time do we have?
About 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, what impact has Amazon and that fiasco had in people that you talk to and the way you perceive New York?
And just introduce yourself.
I'm John Bello, Captain Bello Commercial Real Estate.
Oh, pleasure to meet you. Okay, thank you. Anyone want to talk to the Amazon? There's a great article yesterday that said Long Island City just shrugs off, Amazon, which was, I think, good and interesting to see. But anyone want to make a comment on Amazon? I think that of course it's come up, and I think that what we will all say, and Rob, you're definitely part of this too, but we were all interested and had already had the paperwork signed on our buildings before the Amazon news broke. So I think it's, obviously would have made it more interesting or differently interesting, et cetera, but it didn't change our dedication and commitment to Long Island City.
I'll say that what it did do, is validate the location. I mean, all the reasons that Amazon was coming here are all the reasons that we're talking about. So I think it helped in that sense. And one of the things that we fight a little bit in Boston, and this is changing, is that when we say Long Island City, a lot of people think Montauk. So Long Island City
True,
now,
that's so true.
everybody knows it. And so that's one of the things people have to realize, its location and all the merits, and not just in this room outside of New York. So I think it helped. I think one of the concerns from a life science perspective was that Amazon was going to become so massive that life science couldn't take hold here, quite like we think it is now. So, it's obviously there are pluses and minuses to the whole situation.
Anyone else? Right at the back there. And just stand up and introduce yourself.
Sure. Travis Tinney from ACE Programs for the Homeless. So it's really incredible to see all this development, living and working in the neighborhood, and seeing the development and the business, new enterprises come into the neighborhood. It almost is like we're building a whole new city, like right in front of our eyes, and that's incredible. And I wonder, what are the steps that are being taken, that things that we've learned from seeing where New York City is, but where Manhattan is, and the development there, and the growth, the absolute explosion of homelessness over the last 10 years, and the lack of access into industries and bridges into employment. And LaGuardia Community College talked about some of those important things as well. But bringing all this industry and development into the neighborhood, what can we learn from maybe prior lacks of inclusion that can take place to make sure that Long Island City is a place that, like you mentioned, has schools that are easily accessible, and the leadership and the investment, what steps are being taken there to ensure that?
Great question. Thank you.
I'm glad I answered the last one.
Anyone, go for it. I can, yeah.
It's really not,
Yeah.
an area that we focus on, but it's a great question. I mean,